And we're live. Finally. Sorry we're super late, everyone. This was a lot of fun getting set up last minute for some reason. But thank you for waiting. So we're going to get started in just a couple of seconds. We're going to let some people stream in. And as per tradition, use the chat to tell me what's in your cup. I am drinking some Earl Grey tea. And I am here in New York City. Tell me where you're from. Tell me what's in your cup. And say hello to Joe. Thank you for joining me, Joe. Quite a few. We're going on 5 years now, including one in the office. Maybe two in the office? One in the office? I don't remember. Yeah, that's when we started. Do you remember whose idea this was to do this recap? I remember vaguely when we were talking about it, just walking to a motel at some point. But I don't remember who brought it up. Sure, let's go talk in front of people. It's only, it's only fun. Yep, that sounds about right. Now things are starting to ring. It is starting to make sense. Let's see. Can you hear Joe now? Can you hear anyone now? It should be good now. I did forget to turn it on after I figured out how to fix it, so that's on me. This is something I can code in. That's the thing about the delay. Now it's going to take a good number of seconds till people can hear us again.
Oh.
But people in the chat are saying that they can't hear you. They asked if you're on mute. And the answer is no, Joe's not on mute, but I had to turn on the microphone so Joe's not on mute. This should become like an intro
muted.
thing. Yeah. Every time. Can you hear us now? If you can hear us now, me and Joe, please let us know so we know that we are ready to get started. We got confirmation. Thank you, Michael.
Hey. Thanks, Michael.
So we are, I would say, almost ready. Now it's working. Yeah, everyone is saying it's working now. Thank you for confirming, everyone. We got a thumbs up. Maybe the sad face will turn into a happy face. There was a sad face in the chat from Marta. Ooh, hello from LA. Hi, LA. New York City here. Yeah. I have Earl Grey in my cup, but I'm also drinking an espresso because it's one of those mornings.
Not the same cup, though. I'm hoping that's 2 different cups.
No, 2 different cups. Too small for tea. Way too large for an espresso. Although I had someone make me an espresso, someone who doesn't make espressos, and she put it in this big cup and actually filled it. Like, this is going to be fun. And I drank the whole thing, and I'm not going to lie, I was pretty happy.
There you
go. Okay, so I think we are probably ready to get started. Hello from Sweden.
Very cool.
Yeah, London is in the house. I'm just going through the chat to see where everyone is from. This is pretty cool. Thank you, everyone, for joining. So we'll start officially. Hello, I'm Ariel from Appfigures, and I have Joe with me. And 5 years ago, on a walk to a motel, we decided it would be a great idea to sum up everything that's happening at WWDC and new in iOS, but from the business perspective, not because everyone talks about Swift and everyone talks about code and Xcode, and there's a lot of good stuff. But no one really talks about the cool things that are happening for businesses, the things that can make you more money or get you more downloads. And that's really what we like to talk about. So we started this, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And there's so much interesting stuff that happened. The lock-in that Apple is trying to enforce on everyone. No passwords, which I know Joe loves. The world is just a more interesting place with iOS 16. So we have a few things that we are going to bring up. If you have any questions, any comments, any suggestions, throw them into the chat. Obviously, we read them. And I will try to even put it on the screen. We'll see if that's going to work, given today's shenanigans. But Joe, tell us how you've been. We haven't seen you in a year, on this show at least. What's new? How's everything?
Yeah, I mean, well, for starters, it's a weird location today. I happen to be in a hotel in Amsterdam. I'm traveling for the first time. This is the first time I've been to Europe in 2.5 years, which is pretty crazy. I had I had left. I had done a couple trips just before the pandemic started, and then obviously the world shut down. So I haven't really been traveling a whole lot. But now we're kind of getting back started up, and I do love to get over here every now and then to another time zone and enjoy some things. So it just happened to line up with this. So here I am. So it's the evening time here in my lovely hotel room. You can see my beautiful backdrop here. That's mostly all I've been doing is coding and designing and, not seeing a whole lot of people. So it's great to see your face again. It's great to chat with people. Like glad people around the world are joining us. It's really cool.
Yeah, I am too. I have not been outside of New York City or maybe the surrounding area because I drove out a little bit in so long. I'm just waiting for one, an excuse, and two, to feel comfortable doing it. And I think that's going to come up. I am traveling to 360 iDev. I forgot when it was, but it's coming up. And I have 2 talks this year, not just one. I'm talking about subscriptions, and I'm talking about ASO, which is going to be really cool. I've never done 2 talks at the same conference. So I think 2 for the price of 1 is going to be fun for me. And if you don't know,
awesome. Yeah.
If you don't know what iDev is, it's a cool, small indie conference that Joe talks at all the time, too. One of the favorite guests on the show.
Yeah, and it's in my backyard now, and I moved to Boulder, so it's one of the easier conferences for me to get to. It's in 35 minutes away, so I'll be there for sure.
Oh, that's nice.
Hanging out and hopefully talking again this year too. Yeah, that'll be great.
Nice. So where do we begin? WWDC. What are your first reactions? What is like your overall thinking when you think WWDC this year, other than the videos were short again?
Yeah. I thought it was really interesting, the hybrid idea. I've sensed that Apple, I know it's interesting. You could tell a lot about Apple by what they do, right? Not what they say, but you can see that there are forces at nature, like at Apple, who really, really, really want to do in-person events again.
Yeah.
And they want to get the press back out there for their big keynotes, and they want to get developers in a room. They want that live energy, but at the same time, there are other forces at Apple that clearly are like, "Hey, this is such a better way to do talks." 5-minute talks, 15-minute talks, 25-minute talks. Not to mention we don't have to rent out this giant, McHenry Hall in San Jose and spend $1 bazillion just to get 5,000 developers in town. So, I didn't get to go to the spaceship for the events, the live events, but some of the folks I know who did go. They raved about it. They thought it was just amazing and a lot of fun, even though it was only a day.
Yeah.
A lot of people felt like I would do this again. I would come out just for the day. The ticket would have to be free as it was, and Apple's obviously limited. They could only do 1,000 people or so. But even if they just did that much live, and maybe then they could hybridize like the keynote itself, maybe the keynote would have some live elements and go back to switch to video, but then the main conference session videos would all still be pre-filmed. I think something like that is in the works, or at least Apple will consider that strongly, because it seems like it was a huge success this year.
I absolutely agree. I think in general, the way that they progressed over time, in the beginning, there were no videos at all, and then there were some videos, and then there were videos only for developers, and then eventually became videos for everyone later, and then eventually became live streamed in some instances. It's kind of the standard evolution I would expect from Apple at this point. But I gotta say, I miss WWDC Live, but at the same time, I like that I have access to everything. This big dump of videos, and I went through, I don't even know how many videos in a very short amount of time. I was talking to Joe before, and I was saying that now that they're so short, there's still a lot you can cut out. So I run them on 2x speed, and I skip through with my Apple TV remote, and I can get through a lot of videos very quickly. And the ones that I really care about, I'm going to have to read the documentation anyway, because the talks are not going to give me the meat, not that they're 7 minutes and 26 seconds anymore. So yeah, it's kind of useful.
Even the State of the Union was kind of short on details this year. It was really just a fire hose of here's a bunch of new stuff in very, very high level overview, and not a whole lot of digging down deep. I mean, I remember 2 years ago when they announced the M1, it was like an hour just talking about the innards of the M1. But this year, the keynote was long. It went almost an hour and 45 minutes, I think. Yeah. But the State of the Union was only an hour. So I think part of that was fueled by, well, we have all these people, these strangers on our campus. Let's get them out of here as fast as possible. Like short talk. Beat it, and part of it also is just, it's still, like you said, an evolving format. And I think they're learning as they go. Their video team is world class, and the stuff they're doing is just insane.
Absolutely.
But I think no matter how much work they're putting into it, it's probably less than losing an entire productivity week of those engineers having to be at a live conference. So, I know it looks like they just walked into a room and, recorded their talks. But I'm sure there's a lot of work that goes into that prior. But at the same time, I think this has to be more cost efficient for them and ultimately more effective. Obviously, way more people have access now and instantly to this data and to these talks. But
and way more control over the scripts and what people are saying and how they're pronouncing things. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But I also felt like there was a little more, like this year is like kind of the third time they're doing it. So they sort of have a lot of the engineers and developers who are giving talks, like they were able to inject a little more of their personalities in this year, which was kind of fun. I saw a lot of people joking, a lot of people making up fun metaphors and different. I thought it was really cool how their personalities are coming through, because that's always been the key, the hallmark of Apple presentations, is that you're getting the actual engineer who actually built this thing is speaking to you. Yeah. And so like you're not getting some marketing person who doesn't really understand what they're saying. Right. So the more they can make that feel natural, it's one of those areas where Apple just leads the industry in terms of communicating to an audience. Yeah. And I think universally it's been really well received. I don't think anyone this year it was like one of those weird years. We only had one piece of hardware in the whole keynote and no one was walking away disappointed. It was still a really good year for announcements.
Yeah, absolutely. There was so much. I think we should get into it. And the first announcement that I want to talk about that I think is just monumental to developers wasn't actually announced at WWDC. It was announced a little bit later with a sentence and a half. You can now transfer apps that use iCloud, which is not something you could do before, which is kind of mind-boggling. But man, I think finally this is going to enable so many developers to start thinking about transferring apps, selling apps as a business. Not just a business that has customers, but a business that could be sold. And there's a point I'm going to get to in a little bit that I think this is yet another step in Apple's kind of journey for lock-in. It's platform lock-in. Because if you can't really use iCloud as a developer and you have to rely on something like Firebase, you lose some of that lock-in. And Apple doing that is huge. How do you see that? Do you also think this is amazing? Why didn't they just yell on the stage, we're going to do this, and everyone be like, yes?
Yeah, anyone who's ever had an indie app has at least contemplated this, right? And I've got several friends who are in this situation where they literally couldn't sell the app. They had to sell their entire company, right, to a third party, let that third party then take over the developer account and actually still own the app. Like that was the way around it. And so if you're trying to find a buyer for your app, which like you said, it opens up a huge possibility. There are lots of people who develop and design apps and they build something really cool. And then 2-3 years into it, like it's got potential, but they don't really want to take it to that next level. They had fun as a startup. Yeah. And they would love to just hand that off to someone else, right? Here's a ready-made built-in solution you could buy from me for X number of dollars. Yep. And you could go take it off the ground, Mr. Entrepreneur, right? Or, and I think it just opens up more. Anything that helps indies in the long run is a good thing to me. And, or even, other small or mid-size investments type people to want to foster this kind of a thing. Like it was a weird limitation. I'm sure Apple had the reasons why it was complicated. But I'm just really glad to see that. And I wasn't surprised that it wasn't announced at DubDub, although as I was saying to you when we first got on earlier, like it would have been a huge applause line if they had announced it like in a live keynote. Yeah. Because I think a lot of developers breathed a sigh of relief when they heard that finally. So again, very, very happy to see that. And again, like you said, like it was preventing some developers from using iCloud, right? That's the ultimate reason to do it. It's stopping people from using your built-in solution. If people are going to third parties, that's usually a bad sign.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The chat agrees. I've put a few comments on the screen from people who are saying yes to all of this, basically. So it makes a ton of sense. And I think this was a small but big but small type of announcement. But there's a whole bunch more. So the next one that I think is going to be huge, and not necessarily for the reason most people would think about it, is the Apple Pay Later. Because so we started offering two prices, a monthly subscription price for Appfigures and a yearly, just about 7 or 8 months ago, something like that. And some people love the annual subscription. It's a 20% off. So it doesn't matter which plan you take, you're going to save a ton of money. But it means you have to pay up front. But with Apple Pay Later, you don't really have to do that anymore. And I searched through some of the stuff they said, and they said that it will be applied to subscriptions. So in theory now, if you're a developer and you have an in-app purchase that is, or you have any sort of payment that is annual versus monthly, you might need to rethink that pricing and how that pricing works, because you're going to see more people now shifting towards it. If they can prepay you, but pay with payments later. So that's like, it's like having your cake and eating it too, and throwing it on people and like running, dancing around it.
Yeah, I mean, Apple is, in a lot of ways is becoming a bank, right? And I know a lot of people are upset about that. They don't want to see Apple go in that direction, but the way they've set this up, it does seem like, first off, Apple's handling this themselves. They didn't partner with like a Goldman Sachs or whatever. They're actually handling, like, they know their customers. They have enough data, because Tim Cook knows how to collect this stuff. They have enough data on their customers to know who's likely to be able to pay and whatnot. Yeah. And they're giving this payment option. I know it kind of has the buy now, pay later thing has a bad reputation because the way it has been handled by some groups. But I really think the way Apple's handling this is pretty good. I mean, they're giving you reminders, they're showing you right in your wallet what you owe and when you owe it. They're bringing a lot of clarity and transparency to an industry that frankly is not known to be, great for customers. And so, it's sort of like the Apple Card and Apple Cash, where I think that they have something to offer here. And I think it is going to be interesting, and it is going to open up customers who, you're absolutely right, wouldn't be able to pay the annual right away per se. But like, well, if I could pay that over the course of 2 months, then sure. You know what I mean? Like they'd be more likely to do that. So you're right. Don't discount your yearly subscription too much, I guess is what you're saying.
Yeah, so there are so many implications for something like this, and I've talked about the buy now, pay later on This Week in Apps, my newsletter and my other series on this YouTube channel quite a few times. But ultimately, and I think it's going to be great for that. I mean, you have companies like Klarna and other companies in the space that are doing like an okay job, but they're fairly predatory in a sense that they are not looking out for you. They're not trying to help you get more stuff. They're trying to help them make money off of you getting stuff you don't need. And a lot of people are saying that, and a lot of people feel very uncomfortable about that, and I totally get it. But then you have Apple that's coming into this and is applying this to pretty much everything. So you don't need to even have it integrated by the company you're working with, by the app, or by the e-commerce you're working with. So it's amazing. I think it's going to be a really big one for them. And I totally understand why people don't like it. But at the same time, Apple has to remain the company with the most money in the world somehow. And I think the way to do that is to become a bank, because there's just nothing else you can do. But I also really understand I understand the need to do it in the way they do it. And I think if they can pull it off, because Apple Pay on my device, I've used it a few times. I don't use it too often because I don't know, I just don't think about it. And the card is not as good as checking out on Amazon because you get so much more information. And if they can execute on that even better, just smooth it out even more, I think that's it. No one's going to use anything else if you have an iPhone. And again, it goes towards the lock-in. You want to have an iPhone so you can manage your payments and make payments and have your card and pay less for subscriptions because there's a discount.
Right. Yeah. And even if you're a small merchant, now that you can take NFC payments directly on your phone without even needing like a Square reader or any other extra hardware. I mean, I finally got to use that in a couple of Apple stores now. They're kind of pilot programming it in the Apple store itself, like where they're just using their iPhone to check you out without that extra bulky thing to use to slap to the back. So I think that's going to be that's going to be pretty huge for small businesses to that's one less piece of hardware, one less contract I have to worry about.
Exactly.
Just process my payments. So I mean, that's the thing. Apple is, there are dangers to becoming a bank, right? Because the banking industry has a history. But at the same time, like if they can make these things more small business friendly, I think there's a lot of opportunity there for companies to benefit.
Exactly. And there's a question in the chat. Peter is asking, does the company still get the upfront payment? And the answer is yes. That's the whole idea. Yeah. The whole idea is the company gets paid what the company wanted, and you get to deal with Apple on how you pay it. And that's kind of the greatness of all of this. And the fact that that applies to subscriptions, I think that's going to be huge. But again, a reminder, if you have based your subscription pricing, your yearly versus monthly, based off of data from, let's say, the last year or two, you may want to rethink it because it will probably change now that people can afford to pay a subscription and pay an annual subscription and still not pay it all up front. So it's kind of a win-win, I want to say. So that was subscriptions, and I think that was Apple Pay Later. I think that's going to be big, even if it doesn't take off immediately, because there's going to be some pushback from pretty much everyone else. Give it a year or two, and I think it will slowly become the way of shopping. Whether that's good or bad, that's a discussion for later. Whether people should buy stuff they can't afford, but that's
right.
A whole other
yeah.
thing.
And so, some people just look at it as a really short-term interest-free loan, right? So you're right. If you're terrible with your money, then this might just make things worse. But if you know what you're doing, it's like, to not pay interest for an extra 6 weeks is a good thing,
Yeah.
right? So
exactly.
It's the same thing with like people take out loans for cars, even though they have the money in the cash and sitting in the bank. It's like, I can take that money and invest it because I can get a car loan for 1% or 2% at this point. They're so low.
Yeah.
Right. Why wouldn't I do that? I can easily get more than that in the stock market for the next 5 years.
So maybe.
Yeah.
Right now is weird.
There are this. Yeah. Yeah. Right now is a little strange, but you know what I mean? If you know what you're doing, these kinds of tools can actually help you with your money as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm sure Apple knows this, and I'm sure they've been planning this for a long enough time that they're just going to execute it just so well. Mm-hmm. Or at least that's what I think. We'll see. We'll see when we come back next year. Speaking of things we will see when we come back next year, app clips. So apparently there were a bunch of announcements about app clips. The thing that they launched, 2 years ago, and I think we talked about it and we said app clips are like landing pages on the internet. And they never really took off, or they haven't took off, I would say. Like, they exist for stuff, but who used an app clip in the last year? I know I haven't. I haven't even seen one. I haven't also left my apartment, so it's very possible I'm not in the right place. I'm not creating opportunities, but I mean, that says something. And they show you all these examples on the screen. It's like, I'm never going to use these apps. That's not for me. But they rolled out better testing for them, a whole bunch of little things all over. What do you make of app clips? Do you think this is the year for app clips, or are we need to push?
I think it's one of those things where evangelism would help. There are specific use cases for app clips. Like what I always say, I think I might have said this 2 years ago when we were talking about this. Like, imagine you're driving to a city you don't usually go to, right? And you need to use their parking app. Yeah. Right. Why do I need to download an entire app just to pay parking once? And now I've got this app sitting on my phone that I'm never going to need again. Mm-hmm. Right. So same thing with like a lot of restaurants. And there are a few of them in my hometown in Boulder that use an app clip, like literally on your receipt, there's a little barcode. You scan the barcode, and instead of downloading the whole app, it just downloads a little payment box that basically an app clip version of the app. It's just enough to get me to pay and then move on. Without having to download a whole restaurant's app for that. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Why would you want to maintain all that? So I do think there's opportunities there in certain situations. Are they ever going to become mainstream wide takeoff, like super popular? Probably not. Although I have to say, I thought QR codes were never, ever going to take off. And now suddenly everyone knows how to use a QR code. Like like my mother knows how to use a QR code at this point. It's so ubiquitous, thanks to the pandemic. We finally needed something to make that popularized finally after all these years. But now people kind of get the idea of, I can scan this thing with my phone. Yeah. So who knows? Maybe never say never. Maybe app clips have a better chance now. At least in certain small situations. We'll see.
I totally agree. I think the one problem is, like, here in New York City, if you go and sit down at a restaurant, there's a barcode just stuck on the table, because everyone knows that you take pictures of barcodes, of QR codes these days. What they didn't know, I want to say like 3 years ago, no one knew how to scan them. And now that they know, and now it's just a link to a website. So, and that's super easy. So there has to come something in the middle and say, well, the website only gives you a little picture of a menu, which is really hard to interact with, use an app. But I think it's up to pretty much everyone in the process. So I would not be surprised if Apple is now going to push some incentives to developers to integrate app clips. I don't know how those will come. Apple doesn't really do that in public. But a lot like what they did with Arcade, where they actually paid developers to bring their games over to Arcade, or to bring their games over from a different platform, like the Xbox to Arcade. They might be doing the same thing, or we might see the same thing, in my opinion. So if your app can use app clips, you should probably implement app clips, because that's going to be good for you, I think, in the future. And
absolutely.
Speaking of arcade, we talked about this just a little bit before the show, but Apple talked about Game Center at WWDC this year. And I did not remember Game Center. It still existed. I thought it was shut down years ago, and that's me, and I know how this stuff works. What do you make of Game Center? What are they trying to do?
Literally every other developer I know said Game Center. Like the same thing. We all thought it was actually, now in fairness, I don't know a whole lot of game developers, but like most of us thought that it was completely shut down. I think it obviously still existed from a syncing your game progress from one device to another kind of a thing, right? So they got rid of the leaderboards and the chat and the friends and all the social aspects of it. Kind of were dead. But clearly Game Center still exists in terms of like a technology you can use. It's basically iCloud syncing for games. So yeah, I mean, just to hear them mention games at all, and like bringing up CEOs of third-party companies to talk about games, like it just feels like this thing. It's a tradition at this point for Apple to like keep presenting that they're amazing platform for games, and just no one is buying it. So I don't know why they've been chasing that for so long, but it's true. I mean, all I can think at this point is they're trying to reinvigorate game developers, because they're thinking like for a future, reality OS or whatever they want to call it type of platform, perhaps games are going to be a big part of that. And so they want to keep reminding people that, hey, games happen on our platform, but reminding the game companies themselves specifically, like, hey, pay attention to us. Hey, use that metal thing, because you're going to have to use metal. But we're going to have this device soon that people are going to want to play games on. So you better be ready for it. Start training your developers now. Yeah.
That makes a ton of sense. And I think we were also talking about this before. There wasn't really a lot of talk of AR, VR in this one, because it's probably coming and they wanted to keep quiet, which makes sense.
Yeah. Every dub for the last several years, they went out of their way to do some crazy AR demo. And then this year is the first time they stopped talking about it. I'm like, oh, it must be coming soon. Like as soon as they shut up, then something big is on its way. There was one interesting thing that I found in the What's New in HealthKit talk. Apple, they talked about adding your vision prescription to your health.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, oh, that'd be kind of interesting. What a good idea to have our prescription already on our phones, so that when we order our glasses or whatever device are going to come out, they've already got our prescriptions.
That Apple lock-in,
right?
It's getting serious, more and more serious. One little thing, kind of a side note, I noticed a bunch of people have been hitting the like button, so thank you. If you haven't hit the like button, please hit the like button. Take a moment. It's easy. It's not subscribing to the channel, and it makes me happy. And Joe happy, I think. I'm going to go with the yes. And I think it also tells the Google algorithm that this is the video that everyone must watch, which is probably very true. So hit that like button, please. But going back to the list of things, this is the one we've been waiting for. No more passwords.
Yes.
You've wanted this for years. I think every time we talk about this, you are talking about the end of passwords. How do you feel about this?
I've been dreaming of this for a very long time. I remember my thoughts on it started really culminating maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I was trying to do tech support for my dad, and I realized what was happening was, a while ago when you typed your password wrong, or worse, if iCloud was down for some reason, if they were having server trouble, you would type in your password, and instead of saying, hey, sorry, iCloud's down, it would say incorrect password. And so whenever that would happen, my dad would then just say, I guess I forgot my password. And he would reset his password. And this was happening like hundreds of times, right? So he had a piece of paper sitting next to his computer with every password written down on it. And usually half of them were out of date. There were passwords for the same thing over and over again. And so the poor guy, and then they're asking him the 3 security questions, and he never remembers what answers he put in. And the whole thing was just such a mess. And I just thought, I got so fed up with this, because it was a classic example of computers scientists, people in our professions who are not thinking of the user at all. And so I started writing on Twitter and complaining about this on a regular basis. And I said, we are not going to be free. We are not going to be in the future, as far as I'm concerned. And so there's no such thing as a password. 1Password's great. I love password managers. It's still, all it's doing is covering up it's a Band-Aid on a much larger problem, which is that we're using a concept from the 1960s Unix that worked for professors at universities. Just use your username and password. We're still using that in 2022, and it makes absolutely no sense. you can yell at users all you want for using their cat's name, their dog's name, whatever.
Yep.
It's just human nature. Like we don't want to do this. We shouldn't have to manage this. My computer should know who I am, period. Yep. Right. And as soon as I sit down and look at my computer, it's got a camera, it's got a fingerprint sensor, it's got my watch nearby, it's got enough devices here to say like, oh, this is probably Joe.
Yeah.
And so to see that there are people so I would always say like, we got to get rid of passwords. And I would always get a litany of developers writing back to me about how that would never, ever happen, that there's nothing as secure as a password, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, if you have my password, the computer is dumb enough to think you're me. Yeah. Right? Like that can't be secure, right? I don't care what anybody says. Yeah. So anyway, to see the way they implemented this using like technology that's been around for a while, but to see that there are people at Apple who are dedicated to this and that they're doing it in a cross-platform way where other people can implement a similar type of solution. Yes, once you log in on your iPhone, right, that passkey is specific to your Apple devices.
Yep.
Talk about your lock-in again.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
you can still go to your Android device and log in and set up a separate passkey for that.
Yeah.
But the whole idea of just getting rid of password altogether, and the computer just recognizes it, and it's all done in a way that's very secure. The only thing that ever gets stored on the server is the public key, which you can't do anything with the public key. So someone would have to break into your secure enclave basically in order to steal one of these passwords and these pass keys. And so it's pretty hacker proof. It's so much. Warning any company right now, any website that makes me use a password a year from now, I will not be using your service anymore. I'm done.
and speaking of that's really the key here. I think that's what's going to happen. So I download a lot of apps and I use a ton of apps, and every time you want to do something in an app like favorite something or save something, they force you to log in. And a lot of apps are really good about not forcing you to log in right up front, which is great. The ones that do, I think, are now getting a lot of attention and a lot of engagement. But then I want to favorite something, and I don't want to log in. I don't want to log in with Google. I don't want to log in with my password. I'm not going to log in with Facebook because I barely use that. So all I have left is just to not favorite whatever I want, to not engage with the app. And I think this is one of those solutions that will allow me to finally engage with the app because I don't have to do anything. And if you, for those who saw the talk and saw the demo, it's pretty instantaneous. They take care of everything as long as the app implements that, of course. And I think that's going to be key. So I'm going to be watching how many apps actually implement this. And it's very possible that by next year, this will become kind of a default. And if you don't have that, like you said, you're just not going to use them. And I think that could be detrimental for apps that are not forward thinking in that direction, or don't think about that like user aspect of it, or are using a third-party solution that may not implement it fast enough. And they're going to be in trouble. But also at the same time, the apps that do implement it, it's going to be so much easier. I think word of mouth and just the excitement around them is going to be great for business. Now, I also have this inkling feeling that they being Apple will actually promote apps that are using these new technologies. So we know for a fact that for App Store optimization, if you promote or if you feature an in-app purchase, you get elevated in ranks, even if you don't have the performance. We know that when you use an in-app event, you get elevated in ranks just above other apps that are doing okay or doing what they're supposed to. I recently noticed that it's the same thing for Game Center. You implement Game Center, and these days you get ranked a little bit higher, which I thought was really strange, but this made sense. I wrote about it, I think, 3 or 4 issues ago on keyword teardowns. And now I think if you implement something like this, you'll also get an increase in App Store optimization. So it doesn't matter what you do, you're going to do better, I think, if you have this and get to this point where you don't use anything else.
Yeah, and Apple has made it, as far as if you watch the detailed videos, like transitioning to this is pretty great. The way they've set it up, you can use passkeys or not, so you can have like existing accounts that people still want to use their password. You can offer that to them. This is not an all or nothing solution. If you want to still use sign in with Google or sign in with Apple, you can still use that. This is just another option for login. And I think it's going to very quickly become the one that most people want to use because it's the easiest one to remember. Just come up with a username, which is your email address, and you're done. Yep. Right. Yeah. I'm super excited about this. This to me is the biggest announcement of this year. And it's going to be very fun to watch, like everybody adopt it, hopefully.
I agree. And there are a lot of conversations around subscription conversion, subscription optimization, and all these different things that lead to money. And one of the crucialist of things, that's not a word, but I'm still going to use it, is that you need to get users to engage with your app. And for an app that charges money, there's usually some sort of a user login component for favoriting or for doing other things. Making it easy is going to make it so much better, I think, for you to advance people down the funnel and actually make some money. So that's why I see it as being kind of a power up, especially for subscriptions, especially for apps that are charging money for whatever that little activity is, favoriting or whatever it is. I think that's going to be huge.
Yeah, and the server people I've talked to, these aren't Apple people by any means. These are people who use Linux all day. When I talk to them about, hey, I just, sorry, I was busy the last couple of days at DubDub or whatever, the first thing out of their mouth was, hey, what about that Passkey thing? So I think a lot of people on the server side are very excited about this because they don't want to be storing passwords, whether they're hashed or not or whatever. They just don't want to deal with being hacked this way anymore.
Exactly.
So I do think there's going to be a lot of incentive to do this, like you said, financially as a business, and for engagement, but also just from a server team, not having like one fewer thing to less vulnerability for us. It's a win all around.
Also true. And it doesn't look like it's going to be so difficult to implement. It doesn't look like it's going to be super crazy. It's a few additional hoops, but nothing meaningfully problematic. So I'm pretty excited. I think it's going to be a challenge for the enterprise to adopt something like this, or we're probably not going to see it with enterprise apps as easily, but I'm sure there's a solution for that as well. And that's when things are really going to kick off, especially these days with cybersecurity being such a big thing. So next on my list is something that I don't know if a lot of people notice, and I don't know if a lot of people will notice, but Apple made the process of validating receipts for subscriptions easier. And now it's actually an API call, which I think is subtle. It's really tiny, but it just shows you they're continuing to work on subscriptions, and they really want subscriptions to be something that I think most apps, and I have a feeling games too, are pushing towards. And I think that's really cool. The one challenge I think a lot of people have with subscriptions is it's so much data, and they don't really know how to understand all of it, how to make sense of all of it. So that's something we're always working to improve. There's a new dashboard we're working on, which is going to be out soon. But it's really great to see Apple simplifying the mechanics of subscriptions. And for all of those who have implemented subscriptions, they know that just going the Apple route is so cumbersome. There are third parties that only do subscription management, which is cool because they can do more, but also, come on, Apple. Come on. Make it easier for them.
Just the idea. I mean, last year when they did the StoreKit 2 stuff, and basically it became less necessary to have a server for 90% of people who want to run subscriptions. This year, you're right, is even more refinements. That receipt has always been like the bane of everyone's existence, like trying to parse out all that data. Apple's just making it easier and easier to figure out who's subscribed, who's not subscribed. And this should never be a barrier. Like if you're a small business making an app, you should be able to concentrate on the UI of your app, concentrate on making, delivering a great experience for your customers. You shouldn't have to think about how you're getting paid, right? Yeah. To that extent, think about your strategy for how to get paid. The fact that you want to implement a subscription, how your pricing, all of that stuff. You'll have time to do that because you won't be digging through code all day long trying to figure out. Like I think a lot of people, frankly, never did subscriptions mainly because it was just too hard to implement and test. And, so like anything they can do to make that simpler for developers, I super applaud. So I'm really glad that they're still paying attention to that and still refining it. And the nice thing about apps, the StoreKit stuff is I'm pretty sure that goes back to iOS 14. Like in other words, I think these new features you're still going to be able to get even in iOS 15 or 16.
I think it's
you don't
15,
necessarily maybe. Yeah, anything you don't have to cut off, older users in order to implement is awesome in my book. Yeah. So I mean, if you haven't moved the StoreKit 2 yet, I think this is the year to do it. Yeah,
absolutely. And then speaking of this and speaking of data, this is the one that I care about the most. I was going to talk about it a little bit later, but we're running out of time, so I figured I'd bring it up in importance: benchmarks. And I do not think Apple did enough to talk about benchmarks. It's such a huge feature that I think will change the way that developers run their businesses. So for those of you who haven't seen the announcement, Apple will now give you, this is in the future, and we know that when they say coming soon, it's probably next year, but they will give us a way to understand how apps are doing in comparison to other apps. As everything, they're not going to do it in a way that's going to be as good as possible because they want to adhere to privacy and they want to do all these other things, but and they're introducing noise, so you can't figure things out. But at the end of the day, they're bringing that sort of a notion that you should always compare yourself to the competition. Something I've been talking about for years. I've built a business around because I know how important this is. We've been talking about this for, I don't even know how long at this point, the need to understand the competitiveness of your app versus real competitors, not versus some metric that someone came up with, not versus some one or two apps that are out there, but apps that you're really trying to take on. And we've been doing that for a long time. We've been offering that for, I want to say like a year plus now at this point. And it's been going great, and it's really enabling developers to do more. So now Apple's they're giving other metrics, not the kind of metrics we provide. So they're going to give some sort of insight into impressions. How many impressions on the App Store is your app getting versus the competition? It's little. I think it's a good starting point. I think it's just going to kind of bring awareness. I'm slowly running out of words this morning. Bring awareness to the idea that you have to think about what's around you. And of course, and this is great for us because as soon as people realize that that's good, but it's not very useful, we have everything they need and we're very affordable. So I'm excited about this for a variety of reasons.
I love this. I love talking to you about stuff like this because whenever an announcement like this is made, an uninformed person's first instinct might be, "Oh no, Appfigures! They Sherlocked Appfigures, right?" And it's like, no, like nope. they just helped your customers, your potential customers, realize that they need you.
Exactly.
Because Apple always does this in a way that's like rudimentary and. It basically gets you started. It gets you understanding that this is an important thing. Yeah. And then next thing you know, everyone goes out and looks for the better solution, right? And so, they're going to come running to you when they realize that, like, this data is really helping me. What can I get more? And it's like there are things Apple will never give you, and for that, So I think it's really cool that Apple cares about this stuff enough. They're training people to start thinking about their app as a business rather than just like, hey, don't you want to put more apps? Like for years and years, that's all Apple talked about. Put more apps on the store, put more apps on the store. Don't you want to build 10 more apps? It's like, well, yeah, I do, but I kind of want to have some kind of return on that investment.
Exactly.
And so now it's sort of like, oh, your app is a business, so treat it like one. They're basically finally, saying the things that we've been saying for how many years now. Yeah.
And the really nice thing is, so they introduced A/B tests. They introduced A/B tests fairly recently, but they announced them last year. They introduced product page customization and the custom product pages. That's what I've been thinking about. And those are tools that they're now saying, based on benchmarks, use those to improve, which is a really good way to see how Apple plans everything one step at a time. So I'm pretty excited for what's coming next year. But I also know from my own experience and from writing keyword teardowns and from the newsletter and everything else. And if you don't know what newsletter I'm talking about, I'm going to drop a link in the description. Every week, I look at a keyword and I analyze why the apps that are ranking there, explaining the importance of keyword placement, of ratings, of a whole bunch of other things. And in the process, uncovering bugs and little tips. And so doing that for so long, I think I did 62. Today was the 62 keyword teardown that I put out, which is crazy. But you start to see how things change over time, and they definitely changed in 2022. And I know that with iOS 15, just around the time when they introduced in-app events and custom product pages and everything else, you could see they're putting more emphasis on trying to make the algorithm kind of promote apps. And a lot of people say it's a black box and it's stupid and it favors the apps that are doing bad things and it favors older apps, and none of that is true, actually. Of course, there are ways to game every algorithm, so that's a reality of life. But at the end of the day, I have seen firsthand how Apple is trying to give priority to apps that are new, to give priority to apps that don't have really any performance and any interest in them. And it's pretty incredible. The equivalent of that is maybe the YouTube API, and the YouTube API attempts to do that. It tests a lot of videos with different audiences. I don't think Apple's is as advanced, but they're definitely working on it, which is very admirable, and I've been seeing that this year. In previous years, it wasn't as big of a shift, and you combine it with benchmarks, you combine it with custom product pages, and you're really seeing that Apple cares about the business side of things, something that may have been a part of their 17-year plan, or may have just happened because of developer demand or something like that. But whatever it is, I think that's the way to go. And we already know that there is more money on the App Store versus Google Play. And they know that too, based on data that I'm sure they have seen even in my newsletter. And so a lot of it is about, okay, how do we enable that a little bit more? And I think we're seeing that now, which is really incredible. So that's my take on it.
I agree with everything you just said wholeheartedly, and you're the expert on this stuff. But yeah, if you haven't been watching those teardowns, you really, really should. It's just amazing to read every time you do a new app. Like, oh, I hadn't thought about that, or that kind of makes sense. But like you said, it's proof that Apple does care about this stuff, and that the algorithm does change over time. They didn't just set this thing in stone, you know, 10 years ago. They're providing new tools and then using them in the algorithm, right? So if these product marketing pages, you know, your custom events and those things, like Apple gave you that, like it's just another signal. Like if you want to rank better, you need to start using these tools that they're handing you. Like you can't just blow that one off and say, oh, I don't feel like going and doing marketing for the next 2 days. You know, it's like, no, like that will help your ranking. And so, yeah, I think it's great to see the companies that take advantage of those things and learn quickly how to get back on top of the ranks. And it's great to see that apps that were ranking at the top aren't necessarily there forever. You can unseat them. It is possible to improve your ranking. It's not an impossible task.
Absolutely. And the other cool thing that I see is over the last maybe year or so, maybe 6 months, recently, I would say, I've been seeing more indie developers saying that they're going to take a day and do marketing, like marketing day or advertising day or analytics days, which is such a cool concept. Going from my entire career in this business, I've been trying to tell people just because you're a developer does not mean you don't understand business, does not mean you don't do marketing. Advertising, it's not a bad word. Promotion, not a bad word. All those things. And now you're starting to see that. And I think a lot of it hopefully is what I've been saying for like the last 10 years, but really it's about the tools, and the tools are making it so clear that you can make change. You can bring change to your app. And I think that's really incredible. You don't see that from Google as much, even though Google had benchmarks for a few years now. They had A/B tests running for a few years now. They've had all these things. Didn't make the same impact. So I also imagine the amount of money that's being poured into the App Store versus Google Play from users is also a huge differentiator. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. So
yeah, and Google has a history of like letting their engineers kind of play with new things, but then not necessarily, like very few of them get taken seriously. Whereas if Apple's going to do something and they're going to invest in something that that takes that much company effort to create, like, you know, these custom marketing pages, you better be sure that is definitely going to have some kind of impact, because Apple wouldn't have spent all that time for nothing. Right. Yeah, so exactly. They're at the very least going to try to get some return on that investment for themselves, you know, to say like, hey, this can improve our income if more of these types of apps are being promoted. So yeah, it's never a bad idea to pay attention to those things. And you know, even if you're a developer, you're just the developer and you're on a team with a marketing, like let your marketing team know that these tools exist. I mean, every contract I've been on, like whenever I tell the marketing, you know, we could have custom, you know, pages. They're what? Really? You know, oh, we can create promotional events. What? You know, on the App Store. What? Or they'll come to me and say like, how did they have this? You know, how come they have a different icon on this versus this? Or we're like, oh, that's a custom thing. They're testing something. And you know, they get super excited when I tell them that that's possible. So you know, let your marketing people, you know, in your company, if you're not an indie, you know, let them know that these things exist, and you know, don't be afraid of them. I think they're really cool, and most marketing people will dig into them themselves. You just log them into Apple, you know, give them their own marketers accounts on Apple App Store Connect, and they'll run and play with it. You won't have to teach them anything.
Yeah. I think that's such a good advice, because that's not even something that I would think about. I think coming from where you are, you see it way more. So that's, that makes a lot of sense. Someone needs to write more about the marketing tools from Apple. I'll think about it.
Yeah.
So I think we hit 11, so we're out of time, but we started a little bit late. So what if we go another 5 minutes, 6 minutes? If you have any questions, now is a great time to drop them in. Do you have a few more minutes, Joe?
Sure. Yeah.
Awesome. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about that I had on my list, I have a few things like lock screen widgets. I think that's less maybe about money, more about the potential. But something like private access tokens, something I didn't see much conversation about. But private access tokens are a way to authenticate a session in an app, meaning when you log in, they know that you are really you, your device is really you, stopping people from kind of injecting themselves in the middle. And They claim that it's going to be the end of CAPTCHAs, those silly letters, or move the little puzzle piece, or if you're Google, just find all the bikes, including that one bike that's like behind a tree that's upside down. And when you don't find it, they're like, are you a bot? Are you a bot? Are you sure? Like, can you please leave me alone? I just want to log into the stupid app. So, and I think maybe that's not going to have any sort of immediate impact on the bottom line. But ultimately, I was just talking about how there's more money on the App Store versus on Google Play. And I think it's these little security features that even if people don't understand them, consumers at this point, if they know that they exist, they will feel so much more comfortable buying things. And I think that's going to be, that's exactly what Apple does to make sure that there's more money in the App Store than really anything else that's out there. And the numbers are astonishing. I look at them almost every week, and I share them in the other This Week in Apps newsletter. But you can really see the difference. Like, there is money, and it's big. And it's the kind of thing that you should do everything in your power, like listen to this live stream with you, Joe, and try to figure out how to get more money out of this because the money is there. So that's a little thing that I noticed.
Yeah. Apple is fond of making that argument in all these court cases where they say, like, we charge 15% for a reason. And, people want to dismiss that, and they think the App Store is just, it's the only way to get an app. And if I put that app on my own website, I would make just as much money. And I'm like, you're kidding yourself. Like the privacy and security features of Apple, the fact that my credit card is already sitting in that phone and I press one little button and like show my face to my phone and it just downloads it. And I don't have to worry about you getting my credit card. I know that Apple's going to keep it secure. Like, you're absolutely right. There's a reason why so much more money is spent on those devices, is because people trust that. And to take away that trust, would not be a great idea. Like, I'm a big proponent of saying, like, let Apple do what it's doing. Okay, figure out a way to kind of rein them in or whatever. And the pressure has been good. I am glad that they dropped it to 15% for the vast majority of us who aren't making mostly millions of dollars on our apps. Keep loosening up those restrictions and stop taking the money you don't have to take, Apple. But at the same time, like, don't let go of that privacy and security bit of it, because honestly, I don't want to see governments interrupt that and force Apple to jailbreak my phone, essentially, because I don't think that's going to benefit anyone, to be honest.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I think you can see Google trying to come closer to the Apple side now. They have made so many changes that are aiming specifically at showing we care about privacy, we care about security. I think at the end of the day, it doesn't work, not nearly as well. And they're going to have to do a lot of work because they started as such a Wild West sort of place, but they're trying. And I think them trying is saying Apple did it right. And as much as developers like to hate on Apple for charging a lot of money, for being very strict, for being somewhat of a black box in many situations, for being opinionated, for all those things, it works. I mean, you have a job because of what Apple is doing. Same with me. Although we also cater to Google. But I mean, it's the ecosystem that is really in existence because of it. So every little touch of security, I think, is going to go a long way for developers. And I think, again, developers that implement these sort of things, maybe this is a little bit more nuanced and it's not going to give you App Store optimization support, but maybe it's going to give you a nudge if you want to get featured. Maybe in the future, it's going to be one of those things that if you don't have the right security features in place, featuring your app is not going to be as easy. It's going to be more frictionful. So if you want to get your apps in front of a lot of people, you're going to have to put these in place, which I think is a win, if you ask me.
Yeah, totally. And if you're the only app that a person used today that makes them do a CAPTCHA, right? I mean, what are the chances that they're going to enjoy using your app as much or stick around that much longer?
That is exactly it.
They're going to start seeking alternatives that don't make me do this stupid stuff. The same thing with Passkey, right? I mean, if you don't implement it, that's a password I have to write down somewhere. And I don't want to do that anymore. Like, right now, we're so used to that like you'll get away with it for the first 6 months. But like a year into this, when everyone else has done it and you're the one app that hasn't, you're going to be, you're going to start suffering from a user engagement standpoint.
Exactly. And I think a lot of that then again comes back to benchmarks. So you need to know what your competitors are doing. So something that we have is seeing all the technologies and Apple APIs and Google APIs and all the APIs that apps are using. So if you are an app and you're thinking, okay, we're 6 months into iOS 16, this is in the future, are my competitors implementing these features and should I do the same? That's how you can make that decision. Of course, you can just run and say, I'm going to be the first to do it, but realistically, it's not always possible. And using data, you can say, okay, now it's time to do it. Or you can go to your manager or your boss or whoever makes the decision and say, we have to implement this or else we'll be in trouble. And you can look at something like download and revenue estimates and say, okay, they're making more money after they made this change, which is what we need to do, no? And if they say no, then you know you're in the wrong place, and you know that's a problem. But no one will say no to that, which is, again, why benchmarks are so important. And if anyone who's listening here is not using our competitor tools, I'll drop a link to that in the description. Super easy to get started with. Many of you can probably start a free trial, and it's going to be really easy. But that's kind of my roundup. There were a few little things that I noticed, like I was saying before, lock screen widgets I think are really cool. And if you can get your app to have a widget that ends up on a user's home lock screen, they're probably going to continue using it forever, unless they keep swapping it out. And I think that's kind of a goal. And then web push in Safari, something no one talked about, but I think is going to be really useful, but no time to talk about that. Charts in Swift. Obviously, I care about charts. I don't know how much other people care about charts. Obviously, Apple does because they dedicated a whole talk to it, which I thought was insane, but okay. And
it's a great API from what I can tell. It looks really easy to use.
Oh, really? Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Whoever built it, like you can have there are lots of third-party stuff to add charts to your app, but I've used a lot of them over the years, and like none of them are anywhere near this easy.
Yeah, they're all pretty bad. For our app, we actually built our own, which took forever and was very hard to maintain. But that's what we had to do in order for it to actually look the way it looked and work the way it worked. And now it's kind of old, so it might be time to move on to something better. We'll see if this works for us. And then what else? And then VisionKit was the last item on my list that I thought was interesting. I think it's going to enable new experiences that, again, developers who take advantage of it will probably get better ASO results, better featuring, just more chances to get ahead. So if your app can support something like this, I would say do it. Also, it's so good. It just works 95% of the time. Yeah. What are your last thoughts on new stuff from WWDC that everyone should take advantage of?
I mean, what I just tell people is dig in, find the things that apply to you, apply to the areas that you're interested in that will work best in your apps. I mean, one of the things that I've been working lately on a couple of different apps for clients that are very share-based kind of stuff. And so all this stuff with sharing things through messages, the shared with you stuff, I found that, again, first thing I did was talk to my marketing person and said, like, we want to look into this and see how we can utilize this. If I can get to my chats and like, oh, this is the thing that the person shared with me, and this is who shared that with me, and I can jump straight to that and like thank them right away, right in this, without leaving my app, those kinds of things. There's often little tidbits of things that Apple will release in a new operating system that you don't necessarily see right away. So yeah, just open your mind to the possibilities. Like a lot of things look like, oh, I'm never going to use Vision, right? Oh, I'm never going to use, but like you'd be surprised. Like there might be some spot in your app where that makes perfect sense and you just haven't thought of it yet.
One of the, I guess the last thoughts then before we say our goodbyes is the thought that a lot of people are asking me, should I go iOS 16 only for feature X or feature Y? And I think the answer is not no. I don't know if it's a hard yes. It's definitely not a hard yes, but it's become so easy to see that enough people will upgrade to iOS 16 within a few months of iOS 16 being out. And if it gives you all the convenience and no need to kind of backport any of this new functionality, that might just work at this point. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I say if you're building a new app, just don't even think about going backwards. Like just, if you're a small independent developer, you're the only person on your own code base, maybe there's just two of you, strongly consider it, depending on the app. Obviously, there are some apps that like you have to know your audience. You have to know what kind of phones your audience is using, right? This is the first iOS in a while that's actually cut off a good number of phones, right? So anything older than an iPhone 8 now will not be able to run iOS 16. So if you can look at your stats and say, hey, I've got a ton of iOS 7 or iPhone 7 users, right? Or people using the original SE, then you're kind of stuck, right? But if most of your people are cutting edge, then letting go of that burden and letting go of all that, if effing around in your code, like, if you're on iOS, trying to maintain two separate things and then testing those things on the older phones, it's a good idea, I think, to consider that. But again, you really have to know your audience, and you have to know, like, I'm not cutting off. And sometimes it's just like, well, if I have a stable version of my app now and people are still going to be able to use it, then they don't need the new features necessarily.
Yeah.
You know, I can move forward. Those people can continue to use the older version. You know, it's a trade-off, but you really have to look at your time and your budget and see what you can afford to continue with. I wish I could do that for some of the projects that I work on. For my own personal apps, I always immediately like just jump to the newest version, because I figure, you know, the people who are on an older phone will just use the older app version and they'll be fine.
Yeah.
I can't be expected to maintain all that as a single solo developer, but on projects where I'm contracting, that's always a different discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. I mean, that all makes sense. I'm pretty excited to see what iOS 16, what kind of adoption we'll get on it, because I have a feeling it means an even faster updates to the App Store. And because of everything that I've seen so far in iOS 15, I think 16 is going to be even faster. And again, it just gives a lot of opportunity. And it really keeps me on my toes with what works and what doesn't, because it changes so quickly now.
Yeah. Oh, and with the watchOS 9, you can finally drop Series 3 support, which is nice. That Series 3 watch has been a huge problem for developers. It's weird because Apple's still selling it, but it's not going to run OS 9. So like, I think Apple needs to drop that out of line. They probably will in the fall whenever they come out with the new watch this fall. But
that makes sense.
Something to keep in mind. Yeah, because the watch OS 3, Series 3 watch is just not a disaster. Yeah. It's a real pain in the butt to maintain support for.
I have not done any sort of watch kind of work, so I am completely oblivious to what happens on Watch World, but I'm always the latest version of the watch on my wrist. Yeah. And I actually really like it. I really like the heart rate zones in this year's watch, in whatever watch OS we're on now at this point. So
9, yeah.
I have a feeling that will become something that contributes to business, to bottom line. I don't think it's as big yet. It's a nice to have, but maybe more in that in a future talk. All right, and that's really all the time we have. Thank you for joining me, Joe. This was a pleasure. 5 years in a row. That's amazing. I hope you all got to learn something new, and I hope you can all make changes to your app so when iOS 16 hits, you're going to be making more money and getting more downloads. Another reminder that if you haven't already, go and click the like button. It really helps me understand what people like and what people don't, so I know what to focus on and give you good content. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, now's a great time to do that. I'm just going to throw that in there because I'm on YouTube and I have to. And that's pretty much it. This recording is going to be on our YouTube channel, so if anyone missed it, or if you missed the beginning or anything like that, you can come back and watch it in a few hours. And again, thank you, Joe. This was a pleasure, and I hope to see you again after the next WWDC. Hopefully that will be in person, and I'll get to actually see you. Maybe we'll do a live one of these, like at WWDC. That would be cool.
That would be awesome. Yeah, I'm already looking forward to next year.
Yeah. Awesome. Alrighty. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Joe. I will see you all in about 2 weeks with a new live stream. More on that in an email. Take care, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day or afternoon or evening.